Morning, everybody, and welcome. It's great to see everybody here. And this morning we're going to dive in and talk about some really important things. I mean, when people are wanting to export or are exporting, it's great to have a great product. I think that's certainly a prerequisite. But there are so many different details that need to be in place to do this successfully. And today we're going to focus on a number of those different details. So I'm going to introduce Alexa Jollymore from Perennia first, and then we've got three more speakers in our first segment. John Ernst from Terra Beata. We've got Justin McKenzie from the Station Food Hub, and Josh Council from Good Robot Brewing and the Beverage Factory. So we're going to dive in here. So Alexa, I'll introduce you, and then I'll turn it over, and you can share some important things about food safety and regulatory. So. Alexa is a dedicated regulatory food safety specialist with Perennia with over 3 years of experience in the industry. Her role with Perennia is to help processors meet provincial and federal food regulations by conducting product food safety reviews, pathogen monitoring, testing, and floor plan assessments. Prior to working with Perennia, Alexa completed her Master of Science degree in food microbiology from Dalhousie. And throughout her graduate studies, Alexa worked in collaboration with CFIA, Canadian Food Inspection Agency, gaining an understanding of how foodborne pathogens are found throughout our food systems. After completion of her master's degree, Alexa worked with Agriculture Agri-Food Canada, where she continued researching foodborne pathogens and identifying the causative agent in plant diseases using molecular methods. So, Alexa, I will turn it over to you.
All righty, thank you. So, good morning, everyone. We're gonna start it off by just talking about some food safety and regulatory issues in regards to export. So, we'll get right to it. So, as Peter said, my name is Alexa, and I'm a regulatory food safety specialist with Perennia, and I help assist clients with understanding food hazards and regulations. So, what is food safety? Food safety refers to handling, preparing, storing food in a way that reduces the risk of foodborne illness. It aims to prevent food contamination and ensure that food is safe to eat. Not only that, but food safety is the law. So there's various regulations that must be followed and met when preparing food for sale within Canada, but also when we're looking at internet or exports, international sales. So these regulations, they are enforced by the Canadian Food Inspection Agency or CFIA, and the regulations specifically are the Safe Food for Canadians Acts and Regulations, which is often referred to as SFCA or SFCR. And there's also the Food and Drug Acts and Regulations, which is the FDA and the FDR. You also require certain licensing when preparing food with these regulations. So, in general, the regulations state there's different food additives that can be added into foods that are approved to be used in foods at concentrations. There's labeling requirements, there's packaging requirements. Certain food types have their own requirements, such as dairy and fresh fruits and vegetables. And as mentioned, when it comes to licensing, if you're selling food products outside of Nova Scotia and beyond, you must hold a Safe Food for Canadian Regs license, which again, this is provided by or permit is permitted by the Canadian Food Inspection Agency and inspected by them as well. Part of holding this license means that you have to have preventative controls and a preventative control plan in place. So in general, this means that you must be able to identify associated food hazards and document how these hazards are eliminated or controlled throughout production. An example of a PCP, so preventative control plan, is a HACCP program, so hazard analysis and critical control points. And it's essentially a framework for identifying and controlling potential hazards in productions. You also need a traceability program. So this is something that you need to be able to track all incoming and outgoing material. And Lastly, the other requirement is labeling. So food labeling is also heavily regulated, but I believe there's a topic later on that dives deeper into this. So when it comes to international food safety requirements, so when it comes to wanting to sell outside of Canada, there are different requirements that must be met. So there's global standards such as the Codex or ISO standards that kind of globalize and standardize food safety programs throughout the world. So the Codex, for example, it sets international food standards, guidelines, and code of practices. And the iOS standard is essentially a food safety management program which ensures a structured approach to food safety. So there's also many other global safety certifications, but often when you want to export outside of Canada, you have to meet one of these safety certifications. And as we have our own food safety regulations in Canada, each country has their own set of food safety regulations that must be met along with still meeting Canadian food safety regulations. So, examples of these are in the USA, there's the Food Safety Modernization Act, and in the European Union, there's General Food Law Regulations. So when you are interested in wanting or you're pursuing exporting into different countries, you will need to ensure that you understand what food safety regulations need to be met in those countries, and even down to labeling or the documentation may be different than what we have in Canada, but you also must meet what is required in Canada as well. So some of these potential differences are declarable allergens, what is an approved food additive, the type of packaging material, what is approved and not approved may change depending on the country. Your processing steps, they may require different processing steps or validated processing steps. And such things as novel foods, what might be considered a novel food in Canada or other countries may not be considered novel in Canada. So just things to be aware of when looking into the various countries you may want to be exporting into. So in general, for best practices for compliance, it's understanding your target market regulations thoroughly. So again, reviewing the regulations in the country that you want to be exporting to. A good practice would be to consult a regulatory consultant, as we can offer insight into the different regulations and common pitfalls. Maintain accurate and updated documentation is key, and using clear and compliant label formats. Focus on allergen and additive transparency, and stay informed on regulatory changes. And lastly, conduct label pre-approvals before printing. So as time is a bit short today, I just wanted to give a general overview of Perennia, just so that how we can assist you with exporting your products. So, as Perennia, we are a Crown Corp, and our mission is to support growth, transformation, and economic development in Nova Scotia's agriculture, seafood, and food and beverage sectors. So again, our mandate is to support the growth and transformation of the food and beverage sector in Nova Scotia. So we have various uh, departments with expertise to assist in all aspects of food, but specifically to this presentation in regards to food safety and regulatory issues, we have three departments that would be really supportive in your business. So we have product development, we have regulatory, and we have quality food safety. So specifically with regulatory and food safety services, we can assist in various capacities to make sure that your business, your food business, is compliant when it comes to exporting, but as well as ensuring that you're meeting Canadian food regulations too. So as I mentioned, allergens are a key one, as declarable allergens in Canada may be different than other countries. So yes, just a variety of ways that we can assist you. And lastly, right now we have the Food Ventures program, which provides financial support for the acceleration and innovation of safe Nova Scotia local products to market using Perennia's food safety and product development services. So, if you have any current or future work that you would like assistance with, this is a good program to look into. And the intake period is actually open until the end of the year this year. So visit this website for more information. And that's all I have for today.
All right, thank you, Alexa. And I think it's definitely it's a challenge to say, can you come and talk about food safety in 10 minutes, exporting to the world from Nova Scotia? So we
Yes.
appreciate you giving us an overview. And I think the important thing for people is to know where the resources are that are available to them, and making sure that they talk to the experts before they and I think it's not just when they're ready, it's really before they're ready so that they have things in
Yes.
place, and chances are they may not have everything in place, so there's things they may have to do.
Yes. And
So
yeah, our team at Perennia can assist in all of that. So it's good to reach out to us at the beginning so we can ensure that you're starting off on the right foot.
great, great. Thank you. So, what we've been doing is we've got some other people to do some presentations, and then we'll have a bit of a panel conversation at the end. I know there is one comment in the chat about shipping seafood and meat, so I'll give you a chance to have a look at that, and then we'll come back to it when we kind of have a bit of a group discussion. I'm sure there'll be more comments and questions then. So what I'd like to do now is I think food safety is critical, but also being able to scale and grow the business and understand the resources that are available in the region. So I'm going to now turn it over to John Ernst from Terra Viata. And John, I know you're traveling today, so we appreciate you joining us from your travels. But maybe if you want to try to share your screen there, John, and make sure your slides come up, and I'll just let everybody know a little bit about John. So John's from Heckman's Island, Nova Scotia, and John is the second generation in the family's Terrabiata farms, graduating from the Smith School of Business at Queen's with a specialization in finance and accounting. John joined Terrabiata in 2020. Initially, he was responsible for export sales program, but he's also grown into managing business development and strategy across the group of companies, which now includes a co-processing, agriculture, and cold storage, as well as branded retail, food service, bulk juice, and export business. Growing up in a family business, John has an appreciation for the importance of local agri-food companies to our local economy and enjoys working with and supporting a consistently growing list of other local producers. So, John, I'll turn it over to you, and I look forward to learning about some of the different things out there.
Perfect. Thanks, Peter. So I sort of focused this. Apologize, guys. This is not the prettiest slide deck you've ever did see. We are in the middle of our cranberry harvest season, which is a big part of what we do. We've got 2 weeks of it left, and right now we've been running 18-hour days at one of our receiving plants for the last month. So there is a little on the go this time of year. So the kind of theme today is goes over why we started exporting, a couple of the lessons, I guess, that we've learned along the way, and what steps that we sort of feel would be helpful to point out for companies that are kind of beginning or midway through sort of that journey themselves. So just as a quick overview on Terrabiata, we started as a farm down near Lunenburg, and followed an interesting little growth cycle where first you learn how to grow cranberries. Once you have some product, figure out who was going to buy them. Our original plan, our company today is very, very different from what we expected it was going to be back in 1998 when we started. At that time, the market for cranberries was just in fresh cranberry. So we anticipated selling them locally here in Nova Scotia, 100,000 or 200,000 pounds of product, and that would be that. But we, listened to the market, and so we started to develop some value-added products. Then the value-added products had pretty good traction at farmers markets and stuff, and so we started working with the retailers. Then we needed, at this time, we were still basically making them from home, and so we needed a place to do that. So we we bought a used building that was in pieces up in Bridgewater, trucked it down to Heckman's Island, reassembled it, and started small. And we've added three pieces onto it as we've needed for the different things. That today is still our CFIA and BRC certified facility that we do our juice, our dried, our cooked products, and a lot of our co-processing out of. And then as we sort of had, better traction with the retail products, we realized that we were using more than what we could grow on our own little farm. And so we started to purchase cranberries from other cranberry growers in Nova Scotia and New Brunswick and PEI. And then all of a sudden we had commitments where we took in more than we needed for for the retail line. So we had to find the big reason why we got into the export is because we in that first year we had too much product. We had we had a crop that was too large, and cranberries don't store well fresh. You have to clean them and freeze them, which is a big investment of time and money, and then you have to pay storage for them. And so the product your inventory cost just continues to build. And so it's nice to rotate them through every 12 months. And so 2007, we had more product than we knew what to do with. Our freezers were full, and it was time to look at figuring out who would buy these frozen cranberries. And so the biggest thing, I'll touch on this a little bit later, but the biggest thing was we had to find somebody to teach us how to do that. So that part is coming. Then once we were a little more comfortable with that, we started to do some cleaning and freezing. Once we understood that there was a market for frozen cranberries, something that grew here and that we could process here, we leased a facility. We were running in Lunenburg. We even had our frozen line in Lunenburg with all the rest of the other lines, and it was very, very tight. And so to have a little more capacity, we leased a facility over in the valley that turned into it's actually a pie plant now, but it had a spiral freezer in it. And so we found a very cost-effective place to add a little capacity to our process so we could work with a couple more farms. 2009, we sort of joined as the operating partner of the biggest cleaning and freezing facility in the Maritimes, which is up in Rishabuktu, New Brunswick. And that was much higher capacity. And we started to do the cleaning and freezing, not just for product that we were purchasing, but as for outside contracts, including Ocean Spray and a bunch of different growers. And then we sort of continued with that for a while. And then they were looking at a change in direction in their facility. So we wanted to have our own site. And we also were keeping an eye on our competitors. And it was becoming the norm in the cranberry world to have the storage on the same site as the processing to cut down on the interstitial freight to help keep your export pricing cost competitive, because it is a commodity world after all. So that was another big round of investment, and that landed us with a facility in Sackville, New Brunswick, which is very, very central to all four provinces, and it was basically selected for its logistic location. And we built an IQF cleaning and freezing line, a repacking line, and then started a joint venture with Burnbury Farms to build Atlantic Auto Cold, which is fully automatic cold storage that's there. So broadly, our approach has always been in steps. So this is consistent across the export business and the domestic business, but we start by finding the market. And so for us, that means doing the work, whether it's through trade missions or some of the international trade connection services, or through beating the bushes the hard way, or through referrals. We get an understanding of what is there a market for that grows here locally. So the second step after you find the market, which typically it can even be inbound now because we've got a little bit more presence in that market. And this year, for example, we started a cultivated blueberry product, cleaning and freezing the cultivated blueberries that are grown in Nova Scotia that previously were not being worked with. They were sort of the rejects from the fresh world because they were too soft to be packed in the clamshells. And that was a perfect example of current export customers for cranberry came to us and said, would you happen to have cultivated blueberry? And we said, actually, there is some of that in Nova Scotia. So then we went and we worked on finding the material. And so we developed some relationships with a couple farms and, made an agreement on, you have to go out on a limb the first year, but made an agreement that works for the product. And then our next step was always find the equipment. So we don't like to have, the equipment is expensive. You can spend a lot of money on new equipment, or you can still spend a lot of money on used. We ACOA, Peter talked a little bit about systems and stuff that are there to support people building capacity. We speak very highly of ACOA. We've done a number of projects with them, including our big IQF tunnel up in Sackville, and they've been very supportive and very good to work with. So once we have the market and we have an understanding where the material is going to come from, and it's something stable that we can build a business on, then we'll do some selective investment in some equipment. We try to repurpose as much as we can, but there are bits and pieces that will be relatively specific. We try to keep that as low as possible because you're still proving the concept. And then the last piece is work through the challenges. And so in the last few years, we've done a number of completely new business ideas, and every single one of them has a complication. It's David Ernst, the president of Terbiat, has an amazing quote of, you can have a forecast, but you're either going to be better than the forecast or worse than the forecast, because whatever you think is going to happen is not going to be actually what happens. And that's a good attitude to have when you're working on, something that's a big change, like getting into doing export. So the key steps in our growth, there's two slides. There's 5 or 6 items. So for us, probably the biggest one was on the sales and marketing side. So some companies export by selling directly to a broker and letting them handle the ins and the outs of the commercial arrangement. They're your agent, basically. They find the customers, and you pay them a percentage as a commission, and that's how it's done. We wanted to develop our own sales and marketing team and presence. It's just always been our approach to be very vertically integrated. And so we started with our very first export load back in 2008 through a relationship with a broker at the time that took an interest in Terrabiata. And he was, at the time, there was there was not that many cranberry players. And it was interesting, personally, I guess, to him that one would develop out of Atlantic Canada. And so he took a lot of time to work with us on finding a customer for our first couple loads. And this is in the days well before BRC certification and all that kind of stuff. Like there was a lot to learn. We had an empty building at the farm and a freezer, and we were putting together a grading line based on used equipment that we were purchasing from Highliner that used to clean scallops and all kinds of stuff, and repurposing it. And so he really kind of took us under his wing and helped us understand, how does the logistics work? What are the industry terms? What are the expectations for, when you're dealing with a container of frozen fruit? What's expected for payment? What's expected for, how do you handle a quality dispute? What's required in order to confirm a deal? What's reasonable? What's not reasonable? And that was really good because it's no fun to be on the wrong track. And it's really, we would strongly recommend working with somebody there. And there was a commission for the stuff that we sold through him at the beginning, but for a few percent of revenue, it was much better to start with leveraging somebody's experience rather than learning every single lesson all at once. The other thing that's kind of note there is I find sometimes folks that have a product that works domestically, in LTL shipments, whether it's cases or pallets, volume, are like, for our product, our biggest product is for the export side is frozen cranberry, which ultimately is a commodity. There are ways to sort of differentiate yourself a little bit, and we work to do that. But at the end of the day, we're competing with the same probably 5 companies in Canada that supply a lot of the frozen cranberry to Europe and around the world. And so, I have to work hard sometimes to help our team understand that, if we're doing a bulk juice product here in Nova Scotia for wineries or breweries, when you sell a container of bulk pure cranberry juice, it has a different value, usually lower on the outside world, because yes, it's a bigger pool of customers, but it's also a lot bigger pool of competitors. And so when you have a product that's working here, we have to be conscientious of the fact that you may not get the same. You have to understand the effect that volume has and a full container size order has on your margins too. So on to choosing a specialty. This one was big for us when you're in that kind of commodity space, is you either have to be a niche player, which means you go after, in our case, high-end customers that have very precise quality that they're looking for. And believe it or not, there is actually a big range even in frozen cranberries. Or you have to be a volume player. And that means that you have to run you have to get to your efficiencies of, you have the efficiencies of scale of running much, much more. So we run, we're probably 5 or 6 or 7% of kind of the frozen cranberry market in the world. But our competitors, there's one that's 25 or 30% alone, and they're much bigger. And so, they do things, they have a different approach. We are going after different customers, but that's how, we've kind of leveraged some of our technology and some of our marketing to find customers that value things, that are different than the run of the mill frozen cranberry. And so that helps put a little extra margin into a business that doesn't have as much overhead servicing as somebody that's a volume player. So it is two different approaches, and you sort of have to lean into one specialty. It would be, we can lean one way and then build up the volume. Like our approach, to be honest, has been lean into the niche and continue to build up the volume, because then it just, you're adding margin and working in the right direction. So building capacity in stages would be our next point. If you looked a little bit at our timeline, you'll see we started with a small building. We added pieces on as we needed it. We started leasing a facility in the Valley. We then switched to leasing a facility in New Brunswick, and then we built the facility in Sackville. And so, this has been a process that we've been doing over the last 25 years. And I'm not saying that it has to take everybody that long. But one of the reasons I think that we've been able to navigate this is because we've worked hard to prove the concept. And that means, sometimes that means working with limited tools and limited resources, and make sure it's going to work, and then turn around and do your investment. And so our frozen export business is a great example of that, because we went from a few different lease arrangements into a significant construction project that now 5 years later is finally running smooth, which is really nice. My next piece is going to be, and this speaks a little bit to how you can add volume even if you are a niche business, would be on finding other people with the same problem. So across our kind of little group of companies, we have in the last 5 years taken a lot of time to work on a lot more co-processing, both as a service. And this is cleaning and freezing for in New Brunswick, which is what we do for Haskap growers and rhubarb growers and strawberry packers and a bunch of different stuff. And people will reach out to us with a product that they need cleaned or frozen or sorted. And we have a certified facility, and it works really nicely for that. And it helps our export business, because then you're diluting, your cost base by that little incremental bit, and every bit adds up. Every pound is important. We do the same thing in Lunenburg with the juicing and the cooked products. We make more honey mustard and pizza sauce than we make cranberry sauce, and we're a cranberry company. So the quality program is another piece. Perennia is a great resource for this. We developed ours sort of in steps. So in the 2008 to 2024, it's been a lot of change in the food safety and security side of things, and in the certifications that are required, and what's expected of a company when competing and exporting, sort of in that global market. And we built ours out in steps. We started originally with our CFIA, and then we listened to the market, and we were dealing with customers that were starting to require more and more scrutiny on some of those things. And ultimately that led to wanting to be BRCGS certified, which is the British Retail Consortium, sort of an industry standard for exported, at least frozen fruit. And we chose to do that by having, we found someone local that had a lot of experience. They were working at Highliner. They were kind of later in their career. They wanted a project of helping another company put together their food safety system as a part-time job. So they went back and forth between us for a while. And that helped us along immensely, because it was somebody that had 25 years experience in food processing, and knows how to navigate a lot of those things. And so you need to leverage some of the outside resources in terms of, of people that can help to understand what's required. But then you also need to have somebody that's going to be accountable and responsible for it in your company, because the only reason that we've been able to stay in the export business is because we've had good quality. It is very easy to get, fake or bogus or, even exaggerated quality claims from, new customers and all that kind of stuff. We've had it all happen. And, that you need to have a solid quality program, not just to trust your product, but to protect your interests as well. Then keeping track of your competitors in the industry. So for us, this was super important, because the only way that we stay competitive in the export business is to make sure that we're minimizing costs that other people don't have. So yes, Nova Scotia is not the most logistically, well-centered place for distribution to the US and central Canada, but it is actually really good for distribution to Europe or even to Australia or anywhere else we ship because Port of Halifax is a good asset there and it's good lanes. Um, the biggest change for us though was in our frozen cranberry processing and export business, we were spending significant money trucking the cranberries from the original cleaning and freezing site to outside cold storage, back to the packing facility, back to the port. And we looked around at what our competitors were doing and the changes that were coming in the industry. And in about 2014 or 15, our competitors started to build cold storages on the same sites as the processing plants. And with the goal that they cut out all that interstitial freight. And so we had to make a big decision. Do you make this big investment in order to keep yourself cost competitive, or do you sort of wind things down a little bit because you're not, because the investment doesn't make sense? And we used the conferences that are industry specific. So North America has a Cranberry Growers Association conference that we attend. It's in Quebec every year. And we're also I'm actually the president of the Nova Scotia Cranberry Growers Association, partially because that gets me on the board with all the other representatives from the other provinces. And that's a good way to bump shoulders with some other people. But we invest a bunch of time in keeping an eye on what everybody else is doing, not really worrying about, the specific details, but understanding what are the industry trends and how can we keep up with and get ahead of that to make sure that we are keeping our export pricing as competitive as it can be, because it's, our world comes down to we'll win or lose deals based on 1 or 2 cents a pound per product. So lastly, just as a little piece on sort of identifying further opportunities, and this would probably be a little more relevant for somebody that's just kind of began to export and is thinking, okay, what else can I add to this business? The vertical integration has been one of our core strategic targets, I guess, the whole way along. We've looked to do that when we added the cold storage company into the portfolio. We've looked to do that with the processing company that we added. 2019, we purchased another round of a couple of cranberry farms and that, to be honest, like sort of a building off the previous point, that is now becoming the next industry trend in our business. Is the big processors are vertically integrating, purchasing more cranberry farms to have their own supply so that they can manage the quality and the timelines and anyway, the volumes and everything. And so that's something that's on our radar as well, because it's one of those things where can you invest in your supply chain up and down that helps, and that has that one's a nice one because we found that it has added benefits of other strategic drivers like for our cranberry world. We actually choose to harvest all our own farms later. That's one of the reasons why we're still harvesting here, and it's mid-November. And Quebec's been, our competitors in Quebec have been done for 3 weeks, and it's because we get redder fruit. We have a different growing season. And then the last point is on horizontal growth. And so our approach on this is we spend, a reasonable amount of time brainstorming and talking to other people in the food processing space here in Atlantic Canada and finding things that are opportunities, that have commercial value in the export world. And so that's led us into the cultivated blueberry market. That's led us into the rhubarb market. That's led us into the Haskap processing. That's led us into starting a food service brand. And that's led us in, we have a couple other projects on the go. We're looking at butternut squash. We're looking at a bunch of different stuff because we happen to have the technology now. And so if we can fit in things that fit in around the season and use kind of that technical, that capacity that we have that follow our bit of our mantra of things that grow here that we can export and have, we can add value to, then, that gives us that competitive advantage that, that you need in order to run, a business cost competitive with product that comes from elsewhere. So that is sort of the end of where I'm at on that. So welcome to a sort of at least an overview of the last 5 or 10 years in the export space, at least for Terraviata.
All right, thanks very much, John. And I remember Terraviata visiting much before a lot of this export. So I find it so interesting to watch businesses evolve and and grow. So thanks for sharing that. And I think, that your business is also a resource to other Nova Scotia businesses who are looking to export in terms of some of the capacity that you have, capabilities in terms of processing and storage
Yep.
and that kind of thing. So,
Yep. And we're always happy. We love to have conversations with people that are, just getting into this. Um, the it's we appreciated, a lot of the advice and everything that we had when we were starting out, and it's one of those things. It's nice to kind of pass that forward.
hmm Okay. So, and you're here for a few more minutes. You're able to stay for a few minutes when we
Yep.
get into some Q&A. Okay, because there are some comments in the chats, a couple of questions, so I'll come back to them as soon as I'm going to turn the floor over to Joshua Council first, and then we'll dive into some of the comments and also there's some great comments in there about lenders. I agree with what people are putting in there, so we'll revisit that. But Joshua, I'm going to turn the floor over to you and introduce you, and we're excited to have you. I saw Josh speak at the Food and Beverage Atlantic conference, so I know he's got lots of interesting stuff going on. So. Josh was the co-founder of the Beverage Factory, which makes and packages canned beverages for brands looking to streamline and scale their production while ensuring top-notch quality. And I'm excited to learn more about the capacity and the capabilities that you have. So go for it, Josh.
Can you see my screen?
Yep, all good.
Fabulous. Fabulous. So, like Peter said, Joshua Council here, recovering engineer, co-founder of Good Robot Brewing, which is Halifax's most questionable brewing experience. And later on, the Beverage Factory by Good Robot, which is a beverage co-manufacturing facility. Basically, if it's liquid and it goes in an aluminum can, we can make it. So, starting out here, because I understand there's a range of uh, a very diverse range of people on this call. So, just a quick definition of what is co-packing. Something I didn't fully understand myself before getting into the game. It's basically, along with the term co-manufacturing, the full service processing, creation, and packaging of consumables, food and beverage materials that go into a container that is then sold at a store. So for us, we started with beer, but now we make energy drinks, we make non-alcoholic wine, we make about 40 different varieties of beverages at our factory. And the reason that we exist, the reason that co-manufacturing and co-packing exists is because essentially consumer packaged goods companies have a very high failure rate and a very high amount of people who get into it um, because there's not necessarily any assets involved, and therefore banks don't like to lend to them because there's nothing for them to really take when things go awry. So manufactured companies, by comparison, the bank can take your equipment and your building and still squeeze you for something. So they have a lower failure rate, somewhere in the 20 to 49% range, Canadian averages over the first 5 years, versus the first 2 years of CPG companies. More than three-quarters of them tend to go under. So that's why we exist, because they'll lend to factories that can support 50 or 60 products rather than lend a little bit to each of those individual brands. As an example, in Nova Scotia, we have about 2 years ago, we had over 70 breweries, all of whom didn't have enough capacity to service the demand of beer. So the lenders have a choice to give a little bit to 70 companies, which makes it a non-competitive market, or give a lot more to a few that can support the production of 70 clients. Okay, so we're going to have a little engagement here. You don't have to write anything in the chat. You don't have to give a thumbs up. You don't have to say anything out loud. If you're feeling particularly caffeinated or zealous, feel free to speak out loud when I ask these questions. But these are basically some soul-searching questions on whether or not you need a co-packer for your export markets. So my first question, simple enough: do you have the facilities and equipment to meet your projected production needs for the next 3 years? And if you're saying, I have no sweet clue because I don't have projections for the next 3 years, you might want to talk to Peter first get that kind of stuff in line. Okay. Do you have the time and people to keep producing it yourself? Yes. Yes, but it might kill me. No, or I'm not sure. But it might kill me. Super relevant. So we have a lot of clients, former, current, and prospective, who say, I don't really need a manufacturing facility to make my product because I can do it myself. I've got my own. It's underutilized, etc. And this is a real story. They're making that phone call to me on Valentine's Day at 7 p.m. And instead of being with their partner at that time. So yes, you can produce yourself to death, but lenders and buyers of companies certainly don't love when the founder is required in order to produce the product. Does your product meet food safety and labeling regulations? So first presentation today talked a lot about HACCP and CFIA. And if you're saying, what the hell is HACCP? You might want to consider a co-manufacturer who is going to be privy to those production and labeling regulations. Is your product shelf stable, able to be stored for long periods of time at room temperature or warmer? Because a lot of freight trucks aren't necessarily refrigerated, and you don't want something that needs to be stored cold, being shipped through Saskatoon in 25 or 30-degree heat. This is a real answer, by the way, that I got here. My paraphrasing a little bit for brevity, but basically, I've never had anyone have issues with it, which is, you don't really want to rely on statistical anomalies to determine if your product is food safe or not. Canadian average here, do you have $400 Canadian per square foot of capital to build a manufacturing facility? So for most of us, that's a 10,000 foot facility-ish, let's say. So conservatively, do you have $4 million? If you're saying, do people buy kidneys, you might want to consider a co-packer. Likewise, do you have $100,000 or more marketing budgets for your product? And I'm sure John could tell you even that is probably a conservative start, depending on the market and the scale you're going for. But if you're saying, please stop asking about money, you might want to consider putting your resources and time into sales and marketing budgets rather than manufacturing ones, depending on what you're looking for. Because founders of CPG companies should be selling and developing and growing the business, not stuck behind a line packaging it. Is your gross profit currently at least 40 to 50% of your price or revenue? A good question. And one that we see our clients don't necessarily ask is, once you bake export costs into it, is your gross profit still 40 to 50% of your price? And those are relatively conservative averages. So, you want to make sure your costs are in line because like John said, you could play a margin game, a niche game, or you could play a volume game. With export, chances are you're looking at volume depending on the category you're going for. So make sure your gross profit's in line before you move towards it. A little bit of diligence to do on your end before talking to a co-packer, and this is specifically tailored towards talking about export. First of all, this is something about 60%, I'd say, of our prospective clients do, is visiting the facility. You are more than welcome to and encouraged to go visit your facility. If you're in a different town, you need to fly in, well worth the money. At the very least, you can go smell it to see, does this seem like a clean facility? When I went to a meat packing facility and I smelled fruit, that caused a little bit of a gut feeling for myself that something might not be quite right here. So visit the facility, talk to the team, talk to the production team. They are more than happy to talk about their boss. You'll get a sense of the culture and what kind of business they're like. Required paperwork. Prenia talked a lot about this morning from your distributor. So if you are selling to Sobeys in Ontario, make sure that you ask them, hey, what kind of paperwork are you going to need to see from my co-manufacturer? They're more than happy to share that. They're going to ask for it eventually. Sometimes it takes a minute for the co-packer to get it in line. And these are two big ones. These are two that I wish more prospective clients would, when they're ready to package a beverage or produce a beverage with us, that they would come to the table with target costs and sales projections. And here's the reason why. Most people, and I do it too, go somewhere and to a co-packing facility and say, what's your minimum order quantity? because I'm going to try to keep this as cheap as possible. What you're really doing is you're keeping your initial cash run as cheap as possible, but you're not necessarily getting the best margin out of your product. Manufacturers are inherently problem-solving people. The less you can hold your cards to your chest and the more you let them solve your problems, the better. So what I mean as an example is we had a client who was literally just making canned water. And because they shared their sales projections of the year of 100,000 units, let's say, and their target cost of 84 cents, we went, well, we can't hit your target cost if we only do the minimum order quantity. But if we create a 6-month contract with this many units, we can actually bulk buy these boxes that have the stickers digitally printed on them rather than buy the box and the sticker separately. And that shaved 6 cents per unit off their cans. So if you can bring your target costs and sales projections, chances are the co-manufacturer is going to be able to work towards those costs over time. And if not, you probably want to seek a different partner. At the very minimum, export diligence on the co-packer side, they should have, like Brenny discussed, Alexa, I don't know if she's still on the call, but CFI approved labels. I'd say out of, we produce for 40 clients, I'd say about 25 had labels that wouldn't pass CFIA thumbs up. CFIA doesn't have a lot of boots on the ground. They don't catch every mistake in the store, but we do because that's our bread and butter. And we have had several clients that before they came to us had their products recalled because they were missing critical piece of information, and they paid their nephew in college and his buddies cases of beer to relabel all their cans, hundreds of thousands of cans. So make sure you have that in mind. It really sucks to have product recall. Liability insurance, tremendously important. You should have it too, ideally for your own product. But there's always these gray areas of, let's say you're making strawberry jam, it's going onto a truck. It doesn't quite get in the truck, but it's outside the factory. It falls over. Who's paying for that? You want to make sure that your co-packer is well suited for any product recall situation, food safety situation, or just accidents. They happen all the time. And service agreement of some sort. So in my experience in Atlantic Canada, there's a lot of handshake deals. There's a lot of farmers who don't always have the most pleasant things to say about lawyers. They don't want 60 pages of documentation for a $2 million deal. They want a buddy-buddy relationship. Fair enough. It doesn't have to be a 200-page, McKinsey-approved document, but something in writing that says what happens when the raspberry jam falls off the truck. What are you doing to protect my IP? So that you can't just go take my recipe and make it cheaper and distribute it, and so on and so forth. So this is obviously a lot of information in a 12-minute discussion. So I'd encourage you, whatever industry you're in, usually co-packing and co-manufacturing facilities, they do have salespeople. Those salespeople love to have qualifying calls. So if you are making, let's say, raspberry jam, find a regional co-packer who can do that. And there's a QR code here that goes to our blog, thebeveragefactory.ca, that will show you some good questions to prepare you for your first meeting with a co-packer so that they don't look at you cockeyed, essentially. They do tend to go overrun. They do tend to have more demand than supply. So they have the ability to turn down business. So it's nice to start things on the right foot, not by showing up and saying, I want to make an energy drink. How much does it cost? Right? If you show up with a little more homework of here's my target cost, my projections, they're going to take you a little more seriously, and they're probably going to be a better partner for you. And that's a key point here too, is that once you take on a co-packer, you are no longer supplier client. You are business partners effectively. They don't necessarily fail without you, but sometimes they do. We have seen that happen, certainly. Um, and you might not necessarily fail without them, but odds are pretty good, right? So you want to get to a trustworthy level, like you would with any of your employees or lenders or whatnot. So um, treat them with some decency, because uh, we see a lot of the opposite happen in the industry. So resources for you. Feel free to reach out. I'm happy to answer follow-up questions about the process or our facility, co-packing, export. We've got 40 clients, about 10 of whom export, about 5 of whom export internationally, in heavily regulated industries as well. So happy to have a follow-up conversation. Appreciate your time.
All right, thanks very much, Josh. And I love the questions. I think it's so important to challenge the businesses on these things. And when I say challenge, I don't mean that in a negative way. I mean it in a positive way. And just to, think through the different things that are required and what what each person in that relationship has to do. So I think that's awesome. And I had a quick look with the QR code that you put up as well. I think it's some really awesome resources there for people. So thank you for that. And 40 clients, that's an accomplishment. So thank you for being here. And I'm gonna move to Justin McKenzie from the Station Food Hub, and then we'll dive into some of the questions. John, are you still good for a minute, or do you need to go? Because I know.
Yeah, I'm probably down to my last couple of minutes here, Peter.
Okay, so there was one just a question on cranberries, which maybe quickly, somebody was
Yep,
looking to understand the which countries are your primary markets for the cranberries and selling juice or dried cranberries?
sure. Um, Globally, the biggest use for the cranberry market is pretty large. It's hundreds of millions of pounds of product. Um, the lion's share of that goes into the sweetened dried cranberry and the cranberry juice concentrate production. Obviously, the biggest player in both of those spaces is Ocean Spray. Ocean Spray has done a very good job of marketing cranberry, consumer education, and that's what transformed cranberry from being a product that you buy fresh at the grocery store and make your own sauce just at Thanksgiving and Christmas into, you know, commodity products, ingredients, commercial ingredients that are present in a lot of other recipes. And that was a big push that they did in, the late 90s. And so we're seeing the effects of all of that now. So we participate in the frozen cranberry market. We have decided to build our business to stay outside of what Ocean Spray does. Once again, they are 100 times as big as we are. So we had to find our own, competing head to head with that. Like when we were evaluating our options, we could have gotten into sweet and dried cranberry at the time. There was 13 dried cranberry production lines in North America. And yes, we could have built number 14, but then you're number 14. You have no differentiation. So with the frozen cranberry that we do a variety of different products, but most of it would go to Europe. So we have some big customers in Germany, Poland, France, then the UK, Ireland, Israel, Australia, New Zealand. We do, depending on the year, we can do a lot of volume to China or Taiwan. Um, and so there's a big range. I think we're 22 countries or so that we export to annually.
Mhm.
And that's just because, most of the world's cranberry is grown in North America. And Canadian cranberry has a good reputation, and Parabiata by proxy, and because of some impressive hard work, has a good reputation for that too.
Mhm.
And so we do on the export space. Most of what we do is frozen cranberry. We do export bulk pure juice, so the NFC juice. So that would be for people that are bottling or working with products overseas that don't want to do the pressing. Um, and we haven't exported. I mean, other than like pallet increment amounts of the dried cranberry. So
Mhm. Okay, great. Well, thanks very much, John. And I know you have to go, so we'll say goodbye, but much appreciated.
yeah, thank you.
All right. So Justin McKenzie. So Justin, since returning to Nova Scotia over a decade ago, Justin has been working in the local food movement, supporting a number of award-winning restaurants. Currently, he spends most of his time at the Station Food Hub in Newport Station, where he's helped surpass 1 million servings of locally processed vegetables making their way into Nova Scotia institutions. So, good morning, Justin, and I'll get those slides up there for you. There you go, Justin. I think you're muted. There we go. Oh, we still don't hear you. Maybe there's something wrong with your microphone there. Might be a permissions thing. Do you want to try again?
Justin is a co-host, so everything should be
Yeah.
fine with the microphone. Yeah, from my side at least.
Mm-hmm. Well, maybe while Justin's working through that, I'll just briefly go back to the chat. I know we had a question there for Alexa was early on. So Alexa was, do you know if it's possible to ship a consolidated container of dry fish and meat from Canada to the US? If yes, what should the temperature be?
Yes, I was looking at that, and I think it would be best to have a conversation, just the two of us to ask more questions to give the appropriate answer.
Sure. So if anybody wants to contact you, I know you had contact information in there, but maybe just put it in the
Yep.
chat as well,
Yeah, for sure. I'll do
and
that now.
then people will know where to find you. Perfect.
There
Justin,
it
do you want to
is.
try again? Oh, it's still not working. It must be something on your end with the microphone and Zoom. And also, we did have some comments in the chat about people had, I think Josh had listed some lending opportunities for people, and you definitely need to have that financial situation in a good place. So Josh had listed ACOA, FCC, Farm Credit Canada, Invest Nova Scotia, BDC, and then Matthias also added the Nova Scotia Farm Loan Board if you qualify. And then a couple of resources as well that Josh had put in there about Food and Beverage Atlantic, and then also John added Export Development EDC, which is a good resource and also very important on that insurance piece. I think that's something that people should all definitely want to explore. So Justin, I'll go back and see if it's working for you or not. Is your microphone working? No, it's still not working. Strange. Okay. So maybe what we'll do is we'll see if there's any more questions. I'm just going through the chat to see. I see Alexa put her contact in there, which is great. Uh, and then as Matthew pointed out, Invest Nova Scotia in our fourth session, uh, we're going to explore the different things that Invest Nova Scotia has to support companies exporting. So thanks for that, Matthew. And all right, so perhaps what we'll do is while Justin's trying to see if we could get that working, because I think it's interesting to understand some of the resources in terms of shared services. So, but what we'll do, I know the second segment we were going to focus more on labeling requirements. So I know Rebecca is there from CFIA. And perhaps we'll switch to that unless anybody's got any more questions for Josh or I think John has left, but for Josh or Alexa. And I don't see any more. And I know I think that Josh's information there with all the questions and the link that he put in is very valuable for people looking to export or co-pack, sorry. So get in touch with Josh if you're in that space. Good morning, Rebecca.
Good morning. How's my audio?
It's working fine. Yep, all good.
Super.
Yep.
Great.
Good morning. Welcome.
Thank you very much for having me. I'll see if I can share my slides here and get into some of the regulatory stuff.
All right. And while you're doing that, I'll just introduce you so that people know properly who you are. So Rebecca is a senior inspector with CFIA. She just celebrated her 20th year in service, and she has been a multi-program inspector position for most of her career, working in various programs such as plant protection, fresh fruit and vegetables, and shell eggs. Rebecca's been in the senior inspector role with the inspection support team for just over 2 years, where her main focus is food safety investigation, complaints, and recalls. So obviously, Rebecca's got a great background in this area with CFIA. And I think right now we see your desktop, Rebecca.
Yes, one moment, sorry.
All right, no problem.
I might just turn off my video, but here we go. We'll get there.
There we go. Perfect.
Does that work, or can you still see your
It's all good. We've got your
Perfect.
presentation.
Okay, excellent. Well, good morning again. I'm pleased to be here today to present to you about Canada's regulatory regime for food labeling. As Peter said, I'm Rebecca. I'm a senior inspector with the CFIA out of the Dartmouth office. So I'll begin by saying that the regulatory landscape in Canada aligns with international guidelines such as the Codex Alimentarius and many of our key trading partners. So I'll explain our legislative and regulatory framework, including the agency's recent modernization effects. And I'll also talk to you about Canada's labeling rules and where you can seek guidance and help if you have questions. So then at the end, I'll also share some commodity-specific examples. So as an overview of our legislative framework, Canadian food labeling requirements are found in the Food and Drug Act and its regulations, as well as the Safe Food for Canadian Act and regulations, which are a little newer. The intent of the Food and Drug Act is to protect Canadians against health hazards and fraud in the sale of foods, drugs, cosmetics, and medical devices, whether these items are domestic or imported products. The Food and Drug Regulation, as they apply to food, prescribe, among other things, the rules for labeling of all prepackaged foods, including requirements for the food's ingredient list, like nutrition labeling, date markings, nutrient content claims, and health claims. And it also sets out our bilingual labeling requirements. The Safe Food for Canadian regulations generally apply to all food for human consumption, including the ingredients that are imported, exported, and traded across provinces. So some of the traceability, labeling, and advertising provisions also apply to food that is made and sold within the province. So regulations inherently stand still, and they operate by fixing words onto the pages of a rule book. So the world's dynamic while regulations are static, and the CFA is moving away from this traditional approach to regulation by incorporating responsive regulations into our framework. So the Safe Food for Canadian regulations is an excellent example of that. So these regulations specify the outcomes that a business must meet, rather than prescribing all the ways they must be met, which is what we used to do. So food businesses will need to provide evidence that their chosen methods of meeting the required outcomes are actually effective. So the level of evidence required will depend on the associated level of risk, of course. So for well-documented and known control measures, like a cooking step or process, for example, that requires pre-established time and temperature parameters, industry would need to show that they are meeting these established standards. And for this example, the evidence could simply be, could take the form of an existing peer-reviewed literature. So the CFA recognizes that some businesses, in particular smaller businesses, may require additional information to help them meet requirements. So the CFA is committed to helping these businesses adapt to outcome-based requirements by providing guidance. So because we've shifted our focus to outcome rather than prescriptive requirements, the CFA in some cases may no longer provide detailed and prescriptive information to industry on certain compliance standards. So as a result, the industry may note a shift in the approach to responding to the technical questions, but the CFA has developed guidance documents for each outcome that would explain why the requirement's necessary, what an inspector would expect to see, and proven controls to meet the outcomes. There we go. So as I mentioned, Safe Food for Canadians regulations are set out the requirements for all of the foods that are imported, exported, and interprovincially traded. There are three main elements in the SF or SFCR. That's licensing, preventative controls, and traceability. So I'll explain a little bit about each of those. So food businesses are required to obtain a license if they import food to Canada, if they manufacture, process, treat, preserve, grade, package, or label food to be exported out of Canada or sent across a provincial or territorial border, if they export food out of Canada that requires an export certificate, even if you're not preparing the food yourself, if you slaughter food animals from which meat products are derived for export or to be sent across provincial or territorial borders, or if you store and handle a meat product in its imported condition for inspection by CFIA. So preventative controls, I'm sure we all know about those. They address food safety hazards and reduce the likelihood of contaminating food or contaminated food entering the market. So this requirement applies to both food prepared in Canada, including that for export, and imported food. So most businesses will need to document their preventative controls in a preventative control plan. And businesses are also required to have a complaint, investigation, notification, and recall system in place. So the traceability is the ability to track the movement of a food one step forward and one step back in the supply chain. And keeping traceability records allows businesses to track food products in the event of a food safety investigation or food recall in order to protect consumers and also potentially minimize your economic loss. So let's talk about some exporting requirements. So food exports, including their preparation and packaging, are subject to Canadian acts and regulations. Exporters must meet the following basic requirements to be eligible to export products from Canada. So you would need to hold a valid license as applicable. There is one instance I'm aware of that you would not need to be licensed, and that would be if you are producing a food for export that is only under the umbrella of the Food and Drug Act and regulations. But if you're producing anything under the Safe Food for Canadian regulations, a valid license is applicable. So food has been prepared by a license holder, and that food meets Canadian requirements for the food safety, grade standards, labeling, and packaging in containers. And of course, the fees be paid for inspection and certification for the purpose of export. Some specific export requirements, there are so many. So we've got some links there to some great web pages on our site. So some food and food-related products exported from Canada must comply with additional requirements, and these are set by the destination country or market. So the specific requirements that you need to comply with will differ depending on the product you're exporting and the destination country. As well as food requirements, exporters are also responsible for knowing about the requirements that are related to animal health and plant protection. So the known requirements for various countries are located in the Food Export Requirements Library. And there's also a handy checklist on our website for food exporters that would provide an overview of the steps that are needed to be taken when you're considering exporting food products from Canada. And the food export page on our website is where you can find the rules, licenses, fees, certificates, and notices for food export. So now on to food labeling. So as you may be aware, food labels, they serve multiple purposes, both for regulated parties as well as the consumers. Labels provide basic information such as common name, nutrition information to enable informed choices and allow product comparison. It also conveys information that is important for public health, safety, and nutrition, such as like date markings and storage information. And lastly, it's an effective tool for companies to use to market their product. And this type of information is often referred to as a claim and can include pictures, vignettes, and logos. So to help industry comply with labeling regulations, we have guidance for food safety and the industry labeling tool that you can see an example of here, which is available on our website. The industry labeling tool provides comprehensive information on labeling requirements, and the information is organized to help stakeholders such as yourselves, navigate the site to quickly and easily find the information that you're looking for. The labeling tool is set up into 3 main sections. So the first section being core labeling requirements. These requirements on food labels in Canada, it's the requirement that the information must be presented in both official languages, so French and English, and the importing country that you'd be exporting to may also have specific labeling requirements, and possibly even other language requirements as well. So in addition, all information on food labels must be truthful and not misleading. And some commodities also have more specific requirements, such as the country of origin labeling for honey, fresh fruits and vegetables, and processed fruits and vegetables. Moving on, the second section of the industry labeling tool provides guidance for making claims and other statements. So claims are usually statements that highlight a specific aspect of the food that may help to inform consumers' purchasing decisions. Images, pictures, or other visual representations or any combination of these may also be considered to be part of a claim. So some examples of claims could be origin claims, such as a product of Canada, or maybe a local claim, composition claims such as pure, vegan, or vegetarian, or even highlighting an ingredient like made with vanilla bean extract, for example. Another type of claim are methods of production claims, which would refer to how the product was raised, produced, prepared, and so on. So examples of these claims could be something like non-genetically modified, natural, homemade, and raised without the use of antibiotics. So in general, claims may be made provided they're truthful, not misleading, nor likely to create an erroneous impression. While most claims are not mandatory, in some cases, criteria does exist if you do use a claim. And the last section is probably one of the best sections, I would say, only because it speaks to specific labeling requirements for specific food. So for example, to find guidance on how to label a bottle of wine, you'd select the alcohol icon, and this would then take you to a new web page that would list the mandatory labeling requirements, as well as it would provide guidance for making several voluntary claims and those statements for those products. So other commodity-specific requirements that may be of interest to you could be frozen lobster, which would be considered part of the fish and fish products tab, and guidance for labeling fresh apples obviously could be provided under the fruit and vegetable section. So now I'll go over some specific labeling requirements for fresh apples, frozen lobster, and wine products, just as some examples. A lot of our bigger exports, I would say, from Nova Scotia. So labeling requirements for apples, they would apply to imported fresh apples as well as those that are sold in Canada for interprovincial trade or for export. So there's also provincial regulations that may also apply when these products are sold within the province. So for fresh apples as well as other fresh fruits or vegetables, the industry labeling tool would provide guidance for the labeling requirements. So please consult guidance for further detail. However, these labeling requirements have also been summarized in Table 1 and 2 for consumer prepackaged fresh fruits and vegetables. So fresh apples also have some mandatory labeling requirements, and these would include variety name, grade, and country of origin if the apples have been imported. I'd also like to point out some exemptions, because where there's labeling, there's always an exemption. A common name is not required for fresh apples, since the name of the variety will be present on the label. Prepackaged fresh fruits or vegetables are exempt from displaying a durable life date or a best before date. So in most cases, the ingredient list and the nutrition facts table is not required for a single ingredient food, like fresh apples. And in most cases, fresh fruits and vegetables also would not require the front of package nutrition label or nutrition symbol labeling, which is something also new for nutrition labeling. And as I mentioned with fresh apples, the labeling requirements would apply for imported, interprovincial trade, and for export of fish and fish products, like frozen lobster. But provincial regulations may also apply when the product is sold within the province. So regarding main takeaways for the frozen lobster product, or any fish product, Refer to the labeling guidance in the industry labeling tool. Some fish and fish products have compositional requirements, which are prescribed in the Canadian Standards of Identity, Volume 3 for fish. So a standard of identity sets out what ingredients a product must contain, what ingredients it may contain, and any requirements of manufacturing. There may also be some common name requirements for fish products that include lobster as an ingredient, as well as additional descriptive words that tell about the true nature of the prepackaged fish and fish product must be shown on the principal display panel to avoid the food being mistaken for another food. So this includes description of the various forms or styles of the food, such as split, fillet, minced, flaked, its packaging medium, such as packed in water, brine, or oil, or dry pack, or its condition, such as salted, dried, smoked, for example. So any fish or the meat of any marine or freshwater animal that's been frozen and thawed prior to sale must declare the words previously frozen on their principal display panel. And there are some labeling exemptions, which include exemption from carrying a nutrition facts table and from the front of package nutrition symbol for raw, single ingredient, marine, or freshwater animal products, whether they be in their fresh or frozen form. Now on to wine. So again, as presented earlier, the requirements apply to imported products and those sold for export or in a provincial trade. Furthermore, alcoholic beverages sold within certain provinces and territories may have to meet specific requirements, so consult the provincial and territorial liquor boards. So again, as the other products presented earlier, labeling requirements for wine and all alcohol products are subject to the provisions of the Safe Food Clean Act and Regulation and the Food and Drug Act and Regulation. But in the case of alcoholic beverages, there could be other acts or regulations that aren't enforced by CFIA that may also apply, such as the Spirit Drinks Trade Act. The wine is a standardized alcoholic beverage, and it must meet the compositional standard in Division 2 of the Food and Drug Regulation to be labeled with that common name. Common name requirements for de-alcoholized wine and flavored wine are also described in the industry labeling tool guidance. Other specific requirements for wine would include net quantity declaration, principal display surface, standard container size, country of origin declaration, and voluntary claims such as the use of the term dry or light. You can consult the guidance in the industry labeling tool for more details on the above labeling requirements for wine or for other alcohol requirements. So in addition to the fabulous industry labeling tool, we also offer other services to assist industry comply with regulations. These include an online service called Ask CFIA, which provides one point of entry for organizations and regulated parties to ask questions that help you understand and comply with CFIA regulatory requirements. So if after this presentation you have specific questions about labeling your product, we encourage you to submit these questions to Ask CFIA, because this helps to ensure consistent guidance across the country, and it's the most efficient way for regulated parties to get an answer. Lastly, we also provide an email notification service that you can sign up for. These are useful when we have label updates or other news to share with regulated parties. So I'd like to thank you so much for the opportunity to speak with you today, and I'll turn it back over to Peter.
Thank you, Rebecca. That was great, and obviously a very in-depth topic to cover. But I think it's awesome to give people that overview, but it does reinforce the complexity and the amount of detail that people need to go into just to do things properly, right? And that's, I think, the end result is safe food that is something that can be sold either in the next province or on the other side of the world. So
yeah, it's very complex. It's totally based on product and also the destination country. So that's what makes it super complex.
Right, great. Well, we appreciate you being here with us and sharing all those insights.
Thank you very much.
All right. So now Priscilla is here from Perennia, and which, as Alexa already outlined, is a great resource for businesses here in Nova Scotia. And Priscilla will, there you are. Great. Good morning.
Good morning.
Welcome. So I will introduce you if you want to share your screen and
I can't share it. It says that host disabled participant screen sharing.
Just bear with me for a second, Priscilla. My apologies.
Okay.
Make a host. And here we go. You should be able to share now.
there we
Let me
go.
see if I can do it. Do you guys see it? Let's see. Oh, there you go. I think that's...
There we are.
Do you guys see it?
Yeah, all good, all good. So I will just briefly introduce you, Priscilla, and then I'll turn it over to you. So Priscilla Kimley joined Perennia team as a food scientist, specializing in product development, commercialization, and nutritional labeling. With 8 years of experience in research and development, food safety, and quality within the food industry, she brings a wealth of knowledge to support food entrepreneurs and processors in bringing their safe products to market. So good morning, Priscilla, and the floor is yours.
Great, thank you. Okay, so today I'm going to talk about Canadian food labeling services that Perennia provides. So like Peter said, one of the role that I do is to provide guidance to clients on nutrition labeling and label review to ensure compliance with Canadian regulations. So like Rebecca said, there are core labeling requirements for Canada, like she mentioned, English and French, the common name, the list of ingredients, the allergens, net quantity, the nutrition labeling, the country of origin, date marking, and storage instructions. I just want to mention for storage instructions, it pertains to products that are refrigerated or frozen. So if it's ambient, you do not necessarily need it on your label. You will need the name and principal place of business and then front of package nutrition symbol. I just want to note that all of these core labeling requirements, the location is very important as to where it's placed. So depending on what your product is and how big your packaging is, they all have to be in a specific place on your packaging. Okay. So, like I mentioned, this is an example of the nutrition facts table. So this is the bilingual standard format, but there is multiple formats, and based on your product, it could be different format. It could be the simplified version. It could be formats where you have voluntary nutrients on it. So this is a service that we do provide, and based on your product, we can let you know what format will be best for your product. And then this is like what Rebecca mentioned, this is a new regulation that came into force July 2022, the front of package nutrition symbol. This is how it looks like, and there is a specific place that it should be on the label on your product, and depending on the amount of saturated fat, sodium, and sugar, if it goes above the threshold, then you will need to have that on your label. Okay. So now I want to mention some export labeling considerations. So the product name and description, the country of origin, the nutrition information, the ingredient list, and allergen declaration. I just want to mention that different countries have different allergens. So some allergens are known in Canada that are not known in the States, for example. One of them, for example, is coconut. So coconut is an allergen in the States, but not in Canada. And then the additives and preservatives. So it's very important that the country that you are exporting, you know what additives and preservatives are allowed and what is the amount to use, because there is some additives and preservatives, depending on what they are, there is a limit to how much you can have in the product. Date marking and storage instructions, language requirements. So Other countries, you might have to have different languages, but it all depends on what countries you're going to export. Product and batch identification. So that's mostly for the batch identification. It's for traceability, claims and certifications, barcode and label positioning. The barcode, depending on what country, you want to make sure that your barcode will be able to be scanned there. And then sustainability and environmental labels. So depending on who you're going to sell your product to, you want to think about that too. Okay, so I just took this from the internet as of right now, like last week, just to show you an example of what it looks like for label. So this is just an example of, everybody knows Lay's classic potato chips. And on the left side, you can see that's the label for the States. And on the right side, you can see that is the label for Canada. And right off the bat, you can see that there's a difference. So the difference is the Canadian one has both English and French, and also the net quantity, how it's being declared is different from the USA one. And this is the back label. As you can see again, on the Canadian one, every descriptor has to have the French with it, so the English and the French. And then on the States one, there's only the English descriptor, but also there is a big difference in the nutrition facts table. I'm not going to break down every single difference, but as you can see right now that those are the big difference. And then I just want to mention the nutrition facts table. So the state has what they call nutrition facts panel, and you can see a difference in the serving size and the formatting and how the size are and the font and the bolding and everything like that. And then the Canadian one has the English and the French, and the serving size is different depending on what country you are exporting to. So Canada has a different serving size than the States, and the serving size is for consumer to make a better decision about which product to choose. So they want to be able to compare apples to apples for the serving size instead of having different serving sizes, and the consumer cannot make a proper decision. So those are the big difference. I just want to also mention that we do provide label review at Piranha for Canadian compliance and also American compliance. Okay, and now I want to just highlight some of the services that we provide. So like I mentioned, I'm a food scientist, and we service both the agriculture and seafood companies. We do product development and product enhancements, shelf life for evaluate best before date, nutrition facts table, like I mentioned, sensory testing for taste, texture, and smell, and then we do ingredient sourcing and co-packer relationships. That is the end of my presentation. Thank you.
All right, thanks very much, Priscilla. And I love the comparison with the packaging. I think that definitely illustrates what people need to be prepared to do when they start exporting. And I think it just definitely illustrates it. And then more changes to come on those chips, probably with the front of pack labeling changes coming too, right? So even more differences.
Yeah. If it's above the threshold amount for the sat, fat, sodium, or sugar. Yeah.
Right. I think the chips might be. Just a guess, but
definitely, yes.
all right. Well, thank you. And I do see there's one question in there about labeling, and Rebecca, thank you for jumping in on the organic question, where somebody was asking about that. So I don't know if you have any more comments about that or not, but
I know they just asked again, I guess, Joseph, can I claim my imported tropical fruit such as mango squash organic in Canada? What if the products come from non-established equivalency arrangement? That one I'm not 100% sure of. I would think it would have to be fall under that organic claims or Canada Organic regime. I think it does list there what governing bodies we, I guess, recognize
Hmm.
um, to be auditing for organic. So I think if it wasn't, you could ask my CFI, or sorry, ask CFIA as well if you want to be sure. Um, but yeah, I would assume if it's not one of those recognized, then you would not be able to claim the imported tropical fruit.
Hmm. Likely similar to in meat, where we recognize certain countries' grading systems, and then other countries we do not, right? So,
Exactly. Yeah. And
mhm.
I'm just making an assumption. So
Right.
certainly look into that a little bit further.
Hmm. And there is one other question on labeling, and Priscilla or Rebecca, I think it kind of goes across different sort of expertise, but about that the person grows mushrooms and they use soybean hulls in the substrate mix, which is a food for the mushrooms. So they're asking, since soy is an allergen, do we need to say in the packaging that it may contain soy? There is no soy in the final product, but it does help feed the plant.
That's a really interesting one, Justin. That's really neat. I've never heard of that before. But of course, using a precautionary statement like the may contain, you're certainly always allowed to do that. I guess without knowing the actual like harvesting and that sort of process, if there is a chance for cross contamination, it can never hurt to put a may contain on there. Of course, we aren't going to use a may contain if you are putting the soy into the mushroom or into the final product specifically, but you've stated that there is none in the final product. Yeah, this one's interesting. I did a little bit of researching while Priscilla was presenting there. Um, and again, I would suggest putting in a form on Ask CFIA. I just had a quick peruse to see if anybody had a similar question, and they did not.
Hmm.
But yeah, I don't think there's any harm in ever putting a may contain for an allergen on the package. But
Right.
in this
Okay.
instance, yeah, I'm not exactly sure the process. So
Okay. Thank you. And I think the Ask CFIA is something that people need to become more sort of, I won't say dependent, but just use that tool more often because it is there, and to your point about responsive regulations, that's really where it starts, right? So
yeah, and back when I started, it was very prescriptive. We would get down to telling you how big the crack in your floor could be. And
hmm.
now, we are kind of reactionary. So inspectors are, not as equipped for every single scenario. So those
Mm.
expertise are in the Ask CFIA. And like you said, Peter, it's also a good way to have a common approach and guidance for the entire country instead
Hmm.
of someone in Nova Scotia answering differently than someone in BC, for example. So
Right, right. Great. Well, thank you, and thank you, Priscilla, as well. I think great summary, and I would always encourage Nova Scotia companies to contact Perennia with the different resources that are there, whether it's in food safety or labeling. There's a vast array of resources which are very valuable. So make sure that you seek out the right person at Perennia. And now as we continue on the sort of the labeling subject, we're going to change our focus and look a little bit more international. So, just as an example, and obviously there are so many different opportunities, but we're going to focus on US and Japan as two countries to consider what you need to do from a labeling perspective. And we're very fortunate to have Wang Xiao Yu with us. And Wang Zhao, if you want to test your mic and see, there you are. Perfect. Good morning.
Good morning.
Or
Yeah.
is it good evening for you?
Yeah, right. We are actually 12 hours ahead of yours, so it's already midnight here, and I'm a
Yeah,
little sleepy. Yeah.
we appreciate you staying up to share your expertise, and I'll just briefly introduce you, and then if you have some slides to share, then we'll do that. So Wang Jiao Yu has a master's degree in food science from North Carolina State University, and now works as a senior food regulation specialist of Reach 24H Consulting Group. With over a decade of working experience in the food industry, he has abundant experience in categories of infant formula and dietary supplements produced or exported to various countries, including the United States, Ireland, Australia, New Zealand, and China. Labeling as part of the product compliance aspects is one of the fundamental elements that you need to keep an eye on to avoid basic defects. His experience has afforded him unique insights in this sector. So good evening and welcome.
Yeah, thank you, Peter. Now let me briefly introduce to you the food labeling requirements in the United States and Japan. And let's start from the situation in the US. So the first thing we may have to do, because it's very important, in the United States, the labeling requirements of a conventional food are quite different from the ones of the dietary supplement. So generally, the term food, this concept in the United States is a wide concept, including the final food products, including the food or drink for man or other animals, as well as all of its ingredients. So in this food range, we can see one unique type is the dietary supplement that is usually made from the vitamins, minerals, herb or other botanical extracts, amino acids, and so on. And they are usually in the forms of tablet, pills, maybe a liquid. So here we just need to know that the dietary supplement has different sets of labeling requirements as the ones in the conventional food. So now let's see the items on the conventional food label. Those here we list. I list on the slide are the mandatory and optional items that should be on a US label. We will talk about that later. This is how the items are distributed on a US label. So the general concept here is we have a principal display panel that is the side of the package that directly facing the consumers when the product is put on the shelves. And beside or on the right side of the PDP, the principal display panel, we call it the information panel. And on this panel, more and more detailed information is put on this side. So on the principal display panel, we can see the product name, of course, and the net content in the imperial unit, such as ounce, fluid ounce, pound, and gallon, etc. And also, if you have any claims on your product, then you can claim them on the front side of the food package. And on the information panel, we can see a nutrition facts table and also the ingredient list with allergens clearly declared, and also the name and address of your distributor in the United States. This information is to provide the US FDA that the subject of the legal liability. And also, we have to put on the country of origin. For example, this product is produced in Canada or made in China, and with some barcode and the product dates. And important things goes first. So let me talk about the nutrition facts table first. So we summarize it as 1 plus 14. 1 means the calories. You can see the calories as well as its values are in pretty bold font text. And 14 means the 14 nutrients listed below the calories. For example, they are total fat, sodium, total carbohydrate, protein, and certain vitamins and minerals. So in the United States, there is 20 CFR 101, 21 CFR 101. So in this regulation, this is actually a codex, and then we can see FDA has quite a lot of font size requirement on the nutrition facts table, including those light bars and heavy bars, and some texts are in bold, some are not, and you can see that. The ingredient list is it's not very complicated part. So it lists each ingredient in the product by its common name or usual name and in the descending order by weight. This is an example. But here I want to mention that allergens are very important. So you have to display all the allergens in your product if you have any. So there are basically two ways to demonstrate all the allergens. You can choose either way, the way number one or number two. Way number one is pretty much the way that we can see in this picture, display in a very clear way so that consumers can know it very clearly. And way number two is to display every allergen in the brackets follows the ingredient. For example, the flour from wheat or the lecithin from soy, we can just display them like that. And for easier to remember, we call it a big nine. The big nine means the 9 leading causes of food allergies identified in the United States. And so why are they so important? Because the food allergies are those reactions that may occur within minutes or hours, and the symptoms can range from mild to life-threatening. This product dates part is a little bit interesting because in the food products in the United States, we can see a lot of different terms to describe the product dates. For example, the best before date or the sell by date, use by date, best if used by date, or best if used before date. But actually, none of these dates tells you when it is no longer safe to eat or drink. This is because the product dates are not required by the federal regulation, and this information are added voluntarily by manufacturers. But the good news is the industry associations are encouraging the retailers and the manufacturers to make the switch to only two product date labels. That is the use by date and the best if used by date. So at the end, we highly suggest you to put on the product data on the label because it is very helpful to avoid any potential complaint from customer and the challenge from FDA. So let's move on to the labeling requirement in Japan. So on the left side of this slide, we demonstrate that two authorities that is responsible for the imported food to the Japan. So the upper one is the Ministry of Health, Labor and Welfare. And this authority is responsible for the safety supervision and inspection of imported and exported food. The lower one is the Consumer Affairs Agency. This one is responsible for everything about the food labeling in Japan. And luckily, in Japan, we have a Food Labeling Act that is called the Food Labeling Act. That act actually can let you find any information you may want to know about the labeling in Japan. And also, there are other regulations, but we are not talking about them today because they are focused on only part of the label. For example, the Measurement Act is only focused on the net weight of the label. So, a label in Japan should bear the language in Japanese, and also they have some font size requirement. And we'd better to keep in our mind that there are prohibitions considering to the Japanese labeling. And on a Japanese label, there are 10 mandatory labeling items. So on the right side of the slide, we show you an example, and on the left side, we show you the items. So first of all is the product name, and we have to demonstrate the ingredient list also. The food additives are displayed separately to the ingredient list. Allergens, if we have any allergen in the product, then we need also to demonstrate that. The net weight, the shelf life. The shelf life can be displayed in two ways because some are with short shelf life that is within the 3 months, but someone has a longer shelf life, so you can choose either one ways to correctly display the shelf life on the Japanese label. Storage method, country of origin, and don't forget about the food-related business operator and address. So that's pretty much about Japanese label. With the last factor is the nutrition facts table. On the left of this slide, we show you the format, the label, the nutrition fact label format. And on the right side of the slide, we see this is a final example of a nutrition table. So we know that Japanese label bear all these 10 items on it. And that's pretty much about my presentation today. And thank you.
All right, thank you very much. And it's a great illustration when you look at sort of Canadian. We've looked at Canadian, we've looked at some specifics on US and then Japanese, how there are similarities, but if people are going to export, they need to understand the intricacies of each particular market and the importance of finding somebody who has that expertise. And there are resources out there for sure. And it's definitely important to have that expertise. So thank you very much for joining us, Wanzu. And if anybody has any questions, you can either put them in the chat. It's obviously a very sort of specific topic. And just while we're waiting for that, maybe Justin, we'll see whether your sound is working yet or not.
Can you guys hear me now?
We can. Okay, great.
Wonderful.
All right. All right. Just a second. We'll just see if there's any specific questions with regards to the US or Japanese markets, and I'm not seeing any. But okay. Well, that's great. Well, Wan Zhao, thank you very much for joining us in the middle of the night, and much appreciated your expertise.
Thank you. My
Okay.
pleasure.
All right.
Yeah.
Take care. And all right, so Justin, I will share your screen, your slides for you. And Wan Zhao, if you could stop sharing your screen and then I'll put up
Okay.
the other slides. That would be great. Thank you.
我的找出来，sorry。
We'll get them there, Justin.
Okay.
There we go. Okay, let me I will share those for you and I will introduce you so people know who you are, and we appreciate your patience to get through things. Um I think I did introduce you before, but I'm going to do it again because we're right
Sure.
before you now. So Justin returned to Nova Scotia a decade ago, and Justin McKenzie's been working in the local food movement, supporting a number of award-winning restaurants. Currently, he spends most of his time at the Station Food Hub in Newport Station, where he's helped surpass 1 million servings of locally processed vegetables, making their way into Nova Scotia institutions. So good morning, Justin, again.
Good morning. Thank you for having me. Yeah, so I'm the man in the middle between, the charismatic people like Josh and people who need a product that's going to be co-packed. So there's been some unique challenges that have come up for us in our experience in dealing with co-packing and getting folks ready for export. And one of the biggest one is knowing your product and your processes. So it's very important to understand your product and the processing it requires. Quite often there's an established process, but it's been developed by a third party. So it's been our experience that someone has a product, but they don't have the knowledge on the food safety side of things, and they'll have someone else develop their SOPs and their HACCP plans and things like that. And quite often they don't know why things are being done. They just know what needs to be done. And it's been our experience with all the resources that are out there, like the folks at the Carenia and CFIA. Food safety people love to talk about food safety. So if you have a question, they're going to have answers. There's a lot of really fantastic resources out there. And if you know the whys instead of just the whats, you're going to be a whole lot more successful when it comes time to develop your co-packing plans. There's a difference between best practices and the minimum standards for food safety. So a lot of retail organizations will ask that you have a third party audit instead of just your federal or your provincial licensing. And quite often the third party audit is the best practice, is the only practice. So if you're not striving to hit those best practice targets, when you try to go work with larger retailers, you're going to run into issues. Your food is safe and you meet all the regulatory requirements, but you don't meet that standard of always chasing those best practices. And another thing that's come up for us, a lot of the products that we deal with need to be pasteurized. And if you're just doing a small enterprise scale of a recipe, you might feel the need that you need to boil your product for a specific amount of time. And the great thing about boiling is if it's boiling, you're going to get that log reduction in all the pathogens basically instantly. But boiling a lot of fresh fruits and a lot of produce results in a loss of nutrition and a change in texture and all that sort of thing. So we've found that there's been a few things where we can, because of the pH level of the food, we can boil it at a lower temperature for a little bit longer, and it preserves the quality and the taste and the texture more than just boiling it because you thought you had to, when there's a lot of alternatives out there. And there's a lot of additives that have scary names, but they do a lot of really fantastic work. So don't necessarily be afraid of food additives, because quite often a food additive can make a big difference in your final product and how it's perceived by your customers. And if you could switch to the next slide, please. Another big thing is knowing your customers. So when you're developing product for export, be sure to understand the customer for whom it is being developed. There can be differences in batch and best before date coding and labeling, as been spoken to. Month, day, month. It could be a difference of 9 months as to how your product is being perceived as to whether or not it's going to be fresh. Different countries have different palates. So in North America, we love things that are sweet and salty, but we lean more towards the salty side of things. In a lot of Asian markets, things want to be sweeter versus being saltier. Ingredient preferences, like the use of gums versus pectin for the thickening of foods. Certain markets prefer that you use xanthan gum instead of pectin, where it's the complete opposite here in Canada, where people would prefer to use a pectin because it's perceived as a more natural product. And then there's a lot of dietary or cultural concerns about ingredients being used. So a vegetarian versus a vegan ingredient, or if you're exporting into a market where halal is going to be a big part of your marketing push, it can be very difficult to source ingredients in Canada that meet those standards, because in Canada, it's a newer standard that's just coming online. So you might have to be charismatic and convince people that your food is halal by nature, not by certification. And go to the next slide, please. And the biggest thing is things cost money. So the obvious benefit to working with someone else to co-pack your product is that you get to take advantage of an existing facility, its infrastructure, equipment, and staffing. So you're not on the hook for the building, but there's a lot of costs that aren't always apparent. And Josh spoke to this earlier. When you're on a smaller scale as a founder, people have a terrible habit of not valuing their own time for what it is. So if you're, for example, packing spices in your kitchen at home, because that's something that you can do under the CFIA, you might not realize how much it actually costs to pay someone else to do that for you. And Josh also spoke to the point where your founder should be out there as a zealot for your company, building your customer base, and educating your consumers, not stuck behind in the production facility. And another thing that most people don't understand about co-packing is you might be asked to pay for storage, inventory, and handling of materials. So if I'm asked to do something by a co-packer, it costs our company money. And a lot of folks don't realize that time is money. And we get a lot of pushback about storage fees and handling fees. And then back to the certifications and licenses, if you require a specific standard to be met, it can be very costly for everyone involved. So when we first pursued our third-party audit, it ended up costing the company tens of thousands of dollars, and that was just for our one mainline product. And if you require a similar certification, there is a significant cost that is attached to the certifications outside of what the audit day entails. So it could be, 2 or 3 weeks of sitting in the boardroom like we had to do and going through every single step of our process, making sure everything was going to be up to the standard that the third-party auditor was looking for. Because the only worst thing than going through an audit is not passing the audit, because you put in all this work and you get through on, or you don't get through because you missed something that would be obvious. And we're fortunate enough that we've hired some really fantastic people who are invested in the process and making things better, making things faster. But good people cost good money. It's a huge part of our identity here at the station that we're not a minimum wage employer. We want to make as much of an economic difference as we can in our community. And that means that we pay our good people good money. And if you're approaching a co-packer and cost is your only concern, we might not be the co-packing organization that you want to deal with, because we have a code of ethics and we have a top list of, is it local? Does it support our community? And if it doesn't meet those two criteria, it might not work for us. And if you could switch to the next slide, please. A huge issue with this is the supply chain. So that's what I was dealing with this morning. We make green tomato chow. We have been shorted or zeroed out on green tomatoes for the better part of a month. And the ones that were supposed to be delivered yesterday didn't show up yesterday. So they were supposed to show up this morning. They didn't show up this morning. So we ended up having to find our driver and get him in the truck and drive to go to the supplier instead of getting it delivered. Because like it says there, making sure your partner has what they need when they need it seems obvious, but there will be problems. We've had lots of issues where folks will have their berries cleaned and graded by another organization, and they show up here, and like in the picture, there's stems and leaves, which might be perfectly fine if you're making juice, but we're making preserves, and it makes it hard for us to meet the standards that are asked of us if the product isn't delivered to the agreed upon standards. And plan for disruptions. Another issue that we've had is in sourcing the quality of the pectin that we like to use. We were originally ordering it from the United States, and it would sit at the port of Los Angeles for 2 days or 6 weeks, and we never knew when it was going to be coming. So it took us a couple months to find a Canadian supplier of the same quality of product, which means now it comes from Burlington, Ontario, so it's usually here within 2 weeks instead of that random amount of time. And then developing and respecting timelines. So when are your ingredients going to arrive? How will they be stored? And how soon can you be expected to be picking up finished products? So with our facility, we're lucky enough that we have a tremendous amount of dry storage and freezer space so that we can accommodate people getting items delivered here in the weeks before their production run is anticipated. But we've also run into the problems where we're set up for a day's production for our co-packing client, and the ingredients aren't here. And then we're struggling to find something for our staff to do because we were set up to make someone else's product that day. And we're a big building, but we're a small enterprise. And so that sort of thing, it gets very awkward for the folks further up the food chain from me that have to talk to these folks. Hey, listen, we lost a day's worth of production. Who's going to pay for that? And because that conversation wasn't had ahead of time, then it causes friction in which it otherwise be a really positive relationship to have. And if we could go to the next slide, please. Oh, that's the end of slides. Yeah, so it's been really, really interesting to transition for myself from working in a restaurant to working in a federally inspected facility with the whole pivot towards risk management instead of having someone show up and tell you what you're supposed to do. But it's been a really fantastic opportunity for myself. the restaurants that I worked at, we would sell 115 meals in a day. And now working at the station, it's a lot less romantic. I don't get to be in Bon Appetit magazine or anything like that, but a million servings of Nova Scotian food served to Nova Scotians, it just feels good at the end of the day. So
It does. It does.
if there's any questions,
All right.
happy to answer them.
Okay, thank you, Justin. And I know I did see one question in there that Patricia had put in about co-packing for jam. So obviously the station food hub does that, and Terra Viata does too. So we have two people here. Okay, and if there's any other questions for Justin, but really appreciate you sharing. And I think although we didn't get the order the way we had planned, I think it's nice to have that summary at the end. And certainly, I think we're fortunate to have some of these different resources for Nova Scotia businesses to rely on when it comes to exporting, whether it's scaling up in terms of production and capacity with co-packers, or the expertise on packaging and labeling and that kind of thing. So I see one person's looking for your contact information, Justin. And I don't looks like Justin's internet might be challenged there, so I can put his email in the chat. And then I see another question about minimum order quantity average for co-packers for beverages. So Joseph, I would say if you're interested, there we go. There's your email in there. Perfect. I think that it's best to contact each co-packer because the MOQ is going to be different depending on their capacity and equipment and that kind of thing. So I think that's definitely a question you want to ask them, but I would ask each individual one. So I'd like to make sure we thank all our speakers today. It was a tremendous amount of information shared. So I want to really say how much we appreciate that. And I'll turn it back to you, Yulia, and to wrap it up.
Thank you very much, Peter. Thanks to all the speakers. Thank you for all the participants who are still here with us, because a couple of people had to run, I see. The presentation will be shared after the series is over. All the presentations will be shared. And we can figure out the way of sharing the video. I mean, the videos will be shared, and we can figure out the way of sharing the presentations without sending too much, too big size of email attachments. So we'll see how to do that. So we will share all the information that we have. And just a quick reminder that tomorrow we have day 4 of our series, and I encourage you to visit it because we will discuss shipping and logistics issues tomorrow. Thanks again. Have a great day, everyone. Is there anything else in chat? No? Thank you.